Okay. So now the part that, folks generally, a lot of people come here just for the AMA part, and we like this part because it kind of lets us address things that we may not have thought to address in a KB article. Sometimes these lead us to make a KB article because we realize we didn't explain this in the knowledge base yet. But I should also mention when I go to show Discord that in those open office hours, think of those like AMAs that we hold every month. So we still want to keep up with this. We're going to have this session in this Alliance e-meeting each quarter, but there's kind of an extra AMA that you can do in Discord. So then let's get started on this part. So FileWave admin. So these were questions that were submitted before the event. So we figure we'll run through these, make sure they're answered, and then we could kind of open it up to new ones. But FileWave admin on Linux or Linux client in the future. So FileWave admin, there's sort of an easy answer, which would be FileWave anywhere you could use, within Linux. But as far as a client, I think a client or a sort of native admin, we'd have to see, I guess a good strategy would be go to product board. So that's where you can submit, that you'd like things. You can kind of vote on things and say, we have 10,000 Linux devices and we really need to manage them, or even we have 50 Linux devices and we really need to manage them. Kind of explain what you're looking for, because that can help folks like Tony look at sort of see the demand and see the explanation. If you want to run FileWave admin natively on Linux, maybe explain, hey, our company or our organization is largely going to Linux desktops and we need to be able to manage them and run the admin. So that would be what I would probably do. And if you don't know where product board is, there was a QR code earlier, but also in the knowledge base, if you look for product management, there is a link to product board there. Okay. Okay. And plans to do away with the admin app. I think Tony touched on that when my computer crashed earlier, but no, there's no plans to do away with the admin app. I think people were worried about that because of the way things were going all web, but now it should be clear that it's both. Yeah, Tony?
No, I was going to go ahead and let you answer this one if you wanted to.
Oh, number three?
No, yeah, no, I've got it. So we have to fall on our swords a little bit here when it comes to version 14.9.2 with relation to decreased server performance. To be honest, it's still a little bit of a mystery to us, but I can verify that what we have seen in only the larger environments, those were, over say 1,000 desktop devices, Mac, Windows devices, those types of environments, where we've seen the upgrade to 14.9.2 create some bottlenecks in processing that we still haven't quite nailed down. In each of those environments where we've looked at performance issues, we've been able to just optimize them and do some things like making sure that the boosters are routing messages from clients and that boosters are accessible from everywhere on the network, those types of things, and it has addressed those, but we're not really done with this topic because we don't know the root cause. This is the number one thing that actually myself and Josh have been working on for the past few weeks, is to try to nail down exactly where that performance issue is coming from. If you feel that you've witnessed this in your environment, feel free to open a support ticket on that, and we're happy to look at that with you to see if we're seeing any of these things. There were a couple of things in 14.10. I had mentioned that there were a number of bugs that were fixed. Several of them have to do with some of the kind of smaller things that we've found with relation to this. One, a little bit bigger issue has to do with if you had Android devices set up. the Android sync or the FileWave sync with Google for Android devices was happening too frequently. That was definitely delaying some things, but there aren't a whole lot of environments that are doing that. So this is an ongoing issue for us. As I said, we've been able to get each environment that we've touched working correctly. The question we have is, well, it was working before and all we did was upgrade and it stopped working as well. Why? That's what we're continuing to work on. So we don't have an answer yet, but the more environments we're able to look at, I think the more we'll get honed in on that.
So I guess number 4. So in this case, I think that the answer is the thing that that support does, where they kind of tell the device to re-enroll itself. I mean, more or less. I don't have the KB article posted, but I know support has a mechanism to try without wiping the device. I think I'm remembering this one right. So I guess, if you have one like this, probably reach out to support. But when you see that there's a KB article posted, then there's something that you could try yourself. And this is where
I'm guessing that question is probably at least partially related to number 6 here. In this one, we probably need to talk about a little bit as well. We've had a lot of you tell us that you're struggling with Mac OS updates, and that is true. There have been a number of issues. If you remember, right, I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe 18 months or so ago, Apple made a change away from the software update mechanism and towards MDM for software updates. That has been, well, if I'm being fair, a little rockier than I think everybody would have liked it to be. Well, we've seen in environments right now is that the MDM client, actually the Apple MDM client on devices, stops listening sometimes on the channel that does software updates. What we're trying to do is see what we can do to help this. I believe Apple is aware of some of the issues with software update and is working on some fixes there, which would likely mean an update to devices. So we're trying to see what kind of workarounds we can come up with if there's a way that we can report on it. But we're a little bit restricted there. One thing we were considering was posting a knowledge base article for kind of working around some of the MDM delivery issues by continuing to use the deprecated but still existing software update command that's still on Mac devices in the field. So I think we might see something from us on that in the knowledge base a little later this week, that at least it's not a great solution, but it's at least a workaround if you have something mission critical to get out to devices. But this is another area where we've seen some significant issues. And of course, it's a partnership between us and Apple on that. So we're continuing to work on it.
So doubling back to 5, group policies or device configuration policies for Windows. So this one's nice because we already have this, Windows MDM. And this was asked in the chat too, about something that was sort of group policy-like for Windows client. So go to the knowledge base and search for Windows MDM. So we have something called CSPs. Well, I should say Microsoft has something called CSPs. They're like the Mac OS profiles, but for Windows. And you can set various things. There's already a handful of CSPs in there, but it does at this time require you to set up Windows MDM. So check out the articles and see if there's any challenges there. You need things like Microsoft Azure Premium P1 or P2, for instance. You don't need Intune. Some of the documentation from Microsoft will be misleading a little bit. It'll make you think Intune, but when you look at how they've written it, they kind of say Intune or another MDM basically, and we would be that MDM that they're referring to in those things. So that would be, I guess, the equivalent to maybe group policies.
And if we get granular with this question for a second, though, kind of the way that I interpret it was, does FileWave have anything to do with group policies on the devices? And it doesn't. If we take the first half of the question, FileWave doesn't have anything explicitly to do with group policies, but there's a reason that I really love the product's flexibility. We don't have anything built in that does anything with group policies. However, you can do things with file sets, with scripts, and with custom fields, and even FileWave policies to enforce or do stuff with group policy evaluation. You can make devices do a GP result, right? You can report on them. You can make them refresh as well. So you can do those kinds of things and force it, but there's no built-in interoperability between FileWave and a standard, kind of old school Active Directory GPL. And I say old school, but the reality is most environments are still doing that, right? We built out the Windows MDM environments because we had heard from lots of folks that they really wanted it and they wanted to move to Azure Active Directory fully. We haven't really seen that as much in practice, but the way it works on that side is that you'll have both a FileWave client and the Microsoft MDM client, very much like the way Apple works. And so the way those configuration policies, those CSPs that Josh mentioned work, is they're assigned to the device like a normal file set. That CSP then is listed in the manifest for the device. The manifest for the device, the client says, oh, look, I need this thing. And then it asks the Microsoft MDM client that also points at FileWave to go and get it. So it goes and gets that CSP, and it actually does it differently than Apple. It does not do it on demand. It's on a scheduled basis. So I think it's about every 30 minutes that it reaches out and looks for whatever new thing it should pick up. But if you have a device that's Windows MDM enrolled, that's in FileWave, any CSPs that you apply, like any normal file set, will be applied then through that MDM client.
And you can see those in FileWave Anywhere. If you go to payloads and then you go to configurations, new configuration, there's a Windows one. Even if you don't have Windows MDM set up, you can see what ones are available there. So, okay. So then we have page 2. So the features on the web portal, FileWave admin client, right? So exclusions. So that's about, how you can exclude things in deployments. Most likely, that's the way I read that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that PN was mentioning. We were kind of cleaning up a little bit as we're making those available in FileWave Central as well. So that work is in progress now. There's actually very few things in the Anywhere solution that aren't in the native tool. But the topic that we just talked about, Windows MDM, is kind of the one. It is the one thing that really is in web that by itself is not there. And you mentioned reporting. The person that asked the question mentioned reporting in this case. That's really just a nomenclature change in the reporting that's in the web versus the reporting that's in the native console, because inventory queries and reports are actually the same. Just a different label.
And I would say in Central, editing queries is more powerful. There's more ability to create things, but viewing them in Anywhere, you'll see all those things that you made in Central. That's kind of where it is today. And in the Foundry, if you check out Foundry, there was a web admin webinar video that everyone should be able to see that we did last summer that is still applicable. About the only change would be the fact that deployments is now visible in Central. But you may want to check out that video that's in the Foundry if you've never watched it before, because it kind of goes through everything you can do in Anywhere. As of last summer, which is still pretty much the same. So, okay, I would love a build a script option for FileWave for more advanced administration of macOS hardware that isn't native to FileWave. So in this example, I think that the way that we've always handled it in the past was with what we call recipes in the knowledge base, where we kind of give you the steps. But I think of this question as a neat thing where we might have a library where you could just pick maybe certain actions and just put it in right from a library in FileWave. And I'm guessing that's what the person was thinking of. So I'd say probably for this one, Tony, we'd say they should submit this idea to product board, right? So that it's just recorded and then vote on it when it shows after somebody submits it.
Yeah, and requests around this kind of thing where it becomes scripting, it becomes not dangerous, it becomes difficult to look at building in something to the product that then by its nature ends up taking away the flexibility. So when I looked at things, especially with the scripting options in FileWave, they're so flexible now that a lot of times what we see is that this type of thing actually gets created and resolved in things like Discord and the Mac OS admin Slack channel and Alliance as well, where what we love to see happen with the community is that people do start sharing this kind of stuff, because almost never are you having to do it for the first time, right? A lot, almost always somebody else has done it before. And we're trying to get better ourselves at sharing some of the, tips and tricks and things that we do in-house to help customers too. So I think both angles are good ones here.
And okay, so is there a way to remove file sets for apps that you are no longer using? This kind of goes back to the whole best practice thing about cleaning up. But it's actually more than that, right? So in Apple School Manager, they moved their licenses to license storage, which I haven't looked at recently. So that's like a form of archiving, right? But they show up in FileWave because of that automatically create file set option. So I wonder on this one if it's specific to ASM, and that maybe we have to do something with things in license storage not getting file sets created. That might be an enhancement.
Yeah, maybe. And I also think not only that, but also I know this is an existing request as well for just things that you've built, right? Not even coming from VPP, but things that you've built for file sets, payloads, et cetera, that are no longer associated to anything. Seeing those is a little bit of a challenge, and looking at things by date. So I know there's a couple of requests around that, and which are all really good requests.
Mass wiping iPads. So if you're in Central and you select more than one iPad, you'll see that you can't pick to wipe. If you're in Anywhere, you'll see that you can pick to mass wipe. So in Anywhere, you could technically do this from what I've seen. And because there's an API for wiping, you could actually make a script, if you wanted to, that would go through a list of serial numbers and do a mass wipe. If you're going to do it through a script, be very sure of your list of serial numbers, because you're wiping the devices. In the KB, we have an article that has a script that bulk changes the enrollment user and I believe the device name for iPads. That same script could easily be changed to do device wipes. It actually can take a CSV that has a list of serial numbers. It looks up the device and then does the action of renaming the device to whatever name you want and setting the enrollment user field to be whatever user you want to say is assigned to the device. But you could easily throw into that a thing to wipe out the device. And that would not take much scripting knowledge at all. But if you ever run into something where you would really like to automate it, you can't quite figure it out, reach out to professional services, because we can work with you and help you. Or Discord and the Alliance forums, ask the question and someone may have a simple answer for you. So that should help. And then there was, after COVID-19 and the fact that some of our software is moving to the cloud, we have more clients that, are not on the company network, right? And so this question stems from, if you are a customer that has an on-premise server where you run it yourself, and your on-premise server is only reachable internally, then you rely on devices coming onto VPN to talk to the server. But that's not, keeping it inside your network is not a requirement of FileWave. You can make your FileWave server be available on the internet. In fact, for any of our hosted customers, those are basically FileWave servers running on the internet in Amazon's cloud or Oracle's cloud. So we can totally do that, and expose them. And you have a couple of choices. This is not the best from a security perspective, but you can use port forwarding to tunnel in to your server. You could move your server to your DMZ. I guess the most important thing is, how do your clients talk to your server? If they use a proper DNS name, like if it was, like filewave.com is my server, right? For here at FileWave. If I'm using a real DNS name, then it's super easy because you can move that server out to your DMZ. You can change your firewall rules. If you're not using a certificate that's signed by a certificate authority, you could switch over to using a real cert. We tend to tell people that if you're using a self-signed cert, that's not the best choice. At some point, there will be problems with that. We encounter all sorts of things. So a real certificate obviously is better, but you could move a server that's internal to external, and your devices would talk to it as long as you change your DNS so that they know how to get there. It's not that hard, and I would guess that if you did struggle with how to do this, you could open a support case to ask kind of the basic questions about it, like, hey, I moved it and I'm not sure why this is not working. If you need some more advanced help and maybe want someone to work with you to do the whole process, then professional services, we can do that as a paid project. We can kind of help you through that. But that is totally possible. You can run FileWave on the internet and have your devices always able to reach it. In fact, Tony and I, when we worked together 2 companies ago, when we managed devices, I mean, back in even like 2002, we had our management system out on the internet. And because we saw even back then that there were devices that would leave the network. Even before COVID, there were people that would work from home and they wouldn't come on VPN nearly enough. And security patching was really important. And if you need to report on things like if security updates have gone out, if certain things are set a certain way for security compliance, then you really do want your server reachable on the internet and by your clients all the time. So, okay. That I know was the last question, and I'm going to drop out of the slideshow, and then we're going to go over and see what questions there are. But before that, let me just bring up Discord, because I said I would show a little bit with Discord for folks, and I'm going to show the Alliance forums too. So you're seeing my view, which looks more or less like your view when you're in here. So if you do join Discord, there are these things called channels. And if you ever used internet relay chat in the past, I mean, that's kind of like what Slack and Discord really are. They're basically IRC, but today. There is a channel called events, and that is where you will see events that we're going to hold are always posted here. So you will see that there is a description, there is a date and time along with time zone conversions. You'll see, who's signed up for a particular event, and we put a little logo to make it easy. This Alliance meeting's in here. Although it's not being held in Discord, I still put it here to be consistent so that folks would be aware of events. Any event gets what's called a thread, so that if you click on the 6 messages, you can kind of have a discussion about this event. Like, if you have a question about it, would this be appropriate for me? Are you going to cover this particular thing? That's what those threads are good for. The best practices session, we posted this on YouTube. It's in our YouTube channel. This will be another one. I'm going to hold these every few months because as the product changes, I think the best practices discussion will change a little bit. So it's worth having this and then recording the subsequent one, posting that in YouTube as well. This would be those open office hours that I mentioned, where there's just one per month right now, but we're looking at covering different time zones. This one may work for someone who's in Europe or North America with the time that it's at, but it's not really great for Asia Pacific. So we're gonna add some additional ones per month. Boosters best practices. So going to that question about 14.9.2 and the performance of it or lack thereof, what we found consistently was that we found cases where boosters weren't configured ideally or weren't present at all, or were removed because they didn't seem like they were doing what they should. And so I thought it'd be important to have a booster best practice to kind of go over that, because regardless of whatever performance thing hit in 14.9.2, it is always a good idea to have boosters. And I'll talk about it in this thing. It's going to happen in a few weeks, and then it'll post to YouTube. So you'll see it on our YouTube channel if you subscribe to that channel. And maybe you'll walk away from that video or the session if you join it, understanding a little bit better what boosters can do, what they can't do. For instance, if you have iPads, a booster doesn't really help you. But if you have Mac and Windows, they do, and we'll go over why. So I suppose even if you just had iPads, you might benefit from us talking about like an Apple caching server would come up in relation to this topic. So we have that. The third-party app patching, there's 2 of these. So notice that there's one for Mac OS, and then there's one for Windows. We wanted to hold separate ones. One's on a Monday and one's on a Tuesday. We wanted to split it up because we know there are some of you that only do Mac or only do Windows. We figured it was a cleaner conversation to have the Mac one and then the Windows one and have videos for both. And so if you watch in this channel, you'll see, that we're posting events, and there may be things that you're interested in. So over here in general, you'll see that these topics show up. It'll make more sense as you use Discord, but this tips for using Discord was something that I posted. It was a thread that I posted and pinned that talks about how Discord works. As well, when you join Discord, we send you a message that gives you a YouTube video. That's a 12-minute video that gives a very high level how to use Discord. So if you never used it before, it would be worth watching because it will help you to get started. And once you're started, it's really easy. There is a little learning curve to using it, but it is a really good platform. So that's the thing. There are these kind of topic channels to keep things organized, right? So if we're talking a lot about boosters, why not keep that in a booster channel? It just makes it easier to find. There's also search. So I can, search for, actually I was searching for Let's Encrypt before because I knew that somebody talked about using Let's Encrypt, but I couldn't remember where it was. So when I did this search, I found it right away. So the search is great. It builds up sort of another knowledge base of information. And I try and take things we learn here and in the Alliance forums, and I try and make knowledge base articles when I realize that we've maybe missed, something. So it jumped here, and there was actually a customer who posted how to use Let's Encrypt with FileWave. So I wanted to share that. And, ultimately, I still do owe you guys a KB article from us on using Let's Encrypt. I have the script. I just haven't been able to post the KB article. I want to make sure that it's polished and correct, but that is still on my to-do list to post. So as well, 1410, I've kind of been posting statuses about it, like as it's going, to keep people informed. So if you're not in early adopters, you just kind of know what's going on. If people are running into issues, if we realize that there's known issues, I'll post it probably in this 1410 thread, just to keep it organized. But check this out if you haven't. And, Discord has other things. There's other reasons why you might want to go to Discord. You'll see all these kind of icons down the side. These are other Discord servers that I'm in. There are really some helpful Discord servers out there. And I even made a channel because it can be hard to find them. This other one called Other Discords. Anybody who is in IT, and if you watch any YouTube, you've probably heard of Network Chuck. He's very good at explaining almost any topic. So I put his Discord in here. Linus Tech Tips is another one. So if you know of a really good and helpful one, for doing IT stuff, you could share it in here and then it'll help others. So, okay. So that would be Discord. And while I was talking, were there any questions about Discord before I switch over to the Alliance forums? I didn't see in the chat.
The only thing I saw in chat was somebody who was kind of mimicking my issues trying to get signed up for something. Or maybe you all can do what I do with this when you can't do it. It's just say, hey, Josh, can you do this for me? Because I'm I'm evidently old. I wasn't aware until this Discord was stood up, but I'm now officially old, and so I have to learn to use it myself.
Was it about signing up for the events?
Yes.
Ah, okay. So all you have to do, well, one is you don't really have to be signed up to go to it. All you have to do is come into Discord, and you'll see that the event will say happening now, and it will say, it will have a link and tell you where it is. But I'll tell you that it is always now in the voice channels. There's one called Center Stage, and what you'll see is you'll see a whole bunch of people will be in there. Center Stage can handle 300 people at one time. I would love if we had 300 people at one time in one of these, so that I could ask Discord about a way to go bigger. But for now, this will suit our needs, and then we can record it and post it on YouTube. We do also try to tie our social media together. So for instance, you might not know that we have a Twitter account where we announce things. So, if you look at this channel, you'll see things that we're sharing on Twitter. You'll see, for instance, as videos get posted on YouTube, they end up here. So this Alliance event, when it hits YouTube, will get posted here too. We don't want to have you having to look at 100 different places. So if you're active in Discord, you'll kind of see all the things in one, one ring to rule them all kind of thing. So although that's multiple rings, isn't it? But yes, so you can follow our various things here. So, okay. So I wanted to go over to the Alliance forums, because there will be some of you that just do not go into Discord, right? For whatever reason, maybe it's not open on your network. So this is the Alliance forum, so alliance.filewave.com. When you come here, it will say login up here. Your login is the same. It's that limited support contact or full support contact. It's that single sign-on login. So I think if I do this, right, well, maybe sign out didn't work too good, but let's see if I'm actually signed out. Yeah, so it'll look like this, and you won't be able to post anything, and you'll wonder why. And you have to go to sign in, and I'll do staff in my case. And now I would be capable of posting. See, start a new topic appears. In here, again, it's grouped kind of by topic, but you can always throw something in general if you're not sure. Same thing in Discord. There's a general channel where you can kind of put anything if there's just, you don't know what channel to put it in. If you're wondering what got posted here, there's this activity feed that's really helpful. And when you look at activity, you'll see, these are various posts that went on. So you can see kind of like what happened in recent time, so that you can kind of keep up on things. And yeah, this is just, yeah.
I see that first comment in there, and it reminded me that there was something I wanted to talk about with the wallpaper thing earlier that I forgot to, which was that dynamic element of that text that you saw earlier, that wallpaper that I talked about. That is something that I've seen a lot of folks haven't actually touched with FileWave. And if you're not doing that, you're kind of missing out on a great opportunity within FileWave to leverage dynamic content for devices, which can be things like asset tag, like what we were using before. It can also be things that are based on evaluating details from a device itself through scripts, etc. So if you have not looked at using dynamic content in either configuration profiles, which we call parameterized profiles, which I kind of like the alliteration, but it's a long name. So you can use those variables though in configuration profiles, and you can also use them in scripts, and they're super helpful. So you can see a few of the examples here, and any custom fields that you build, you can use there as well. So for instance, the one that I used, which was %asset_tag%, was one that I created. I created a field called asset tag. We don't have a built-in field for that. Other examples, if I were still running a live environment, I'd probably have a field to read the virus definition versions of whatever antivirus that I'm using on my devices, right? That would be something that I'd really want to see. The way that you can use this in configuration profiles, especially with things like email address, for instance, if you're doing LDAP integration, especially, as you can use that to then populate configuration profiles so that people don't have to type in their first name, their last name, their email address, for instance. Those can all be dynamically put in the profile. And then all the user has to do on onboarding is type in their password, the only thing you don't know, for instance. So I just wanted to mention that because I forgot to do it earlier.
Yeah, and I have the wallpaper profile where I had %serial number %. And you mentioned how you made a field, right? And if someone wonders how they would do that, that's really the custom fields. And when I go here, you'll see that there's this internal name, right, that can be referenced by variable. So, and actually these custom fields about the configuration of boosters that we're going to talk about in the booster best practices. This is in a KB article that we recently published. And these fields can really help you to validate that your clients really are configured to see boosters. And there's a couple of more fields that aren't in here that are in the KB article for the port number, because Tony and I ran into a case where the booster was defined by name, but the port number was 0. And the only way to really spot that would be to have a custom field that, kind of called that out. But that tripped Tony and I both up for a little bit. We thought everything was fine until the booster port was 0.
You might show while we're just in there for a second, Josh, on the, if you do an inventory query, if you edit any one of them, when you, for the built-in fields, you'll notice on the left that any fields that you see, if you click on one of the fields, you can pick.
Oh, yeah.
Josh, that
Yep.
down at the bottom, it's going to give you the internal name for that field as well. So you can see it for any of the built-in fields. We give you some of them there in the knowledge base article, some of the most used ones. But if there's something else that you wanted to use, for instance, the built-in building field, it's not actually used for anything in most environments, but the internal name for that is building.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that was a good topic. Was there any other chat stuff going on? I saw
another
Andrew.
question with relation to Discord about whether there's any kind of expiration policy on content or anything.
So I believe not. They specifically don't purge. I know with GDPR that there have been concerns that will be worked out, of course, because Discord will face either implementing such things like the right to be forgotten. Right now, you could delete your Discord name, and it deletes that there's then no relation to you, but the messages are left behind. So we have to see how that plays out between Discord and the EU. But my guess is that they'll implement the policies to handle things like right to be forgotten. And when they do that, we'll have to think about how to implement them to be compliant, or maybe they'll just be set by Discord, because you might imagine that there's a lot of benefit to conversations not getting purged, because then that pool of knowledge goes away. But there are certain rules in places like EU where you should be able to ask to remove your data or to be able to download all the data related to you. And I believe that Discord is not there yet where they need to be. So, and that could be one thing that pushes you personally over to the Alliance forums. And so, like I said, we are using Discord for those in-person things. And I hate that if somebody has to miss those because of that, but I'm hoping that that's a short-term problem. And at least you'll have the videos in YouTube. So let's see. So what other things? Maybe, well, we talked about the stuff in 1410. Anybody that goes to the knowledge base right now will see that we have the 1410 release notes. We always post those ahead of the release getting published. This was called out on Tony's slide back when my computer crashed, but this port, this 20124, definitely make sure that it's open. If you're hosted, you don't have to worry about that on our end, but if your firewall is a little restrictive, make sure you can get to your FileWave server on that TCP port, because that's an additional notification port. And we do already have articles about customizing the wallpaper on devices, so you can already see how that works. The forcing a reboot, and again, it just has the screenshot from Central, but it's the exact same wording in Anywhere.
There was a question earlier from Sean about booster configuration, just kind of some best practices and knowledge-based articles. And then I just thought I'd mention that that one's been a really tough one for us because the answer is it depends. With booster configuration, it's largely dependent on the number of devices that you're managing. But the main thing that we want to do with boosters, if you're only managing iPads, for instance, and you're MDM only, you're not managing Windows or Mac clients, boosters don't matter to you at all. But if you're managing a significant number of Mac or Windows clients, let's say anything over 500, you probably want to have at least one booster. The things that we find that are the most important is that your devices have a booster wherever they go. And it kind of depends on your environment. So for instance, for a lot of K-12, an external booster isn't necessarily needed if the devices aren't leaving campus, right? So this is where all the it depends stuff comes up. But in other environments, like we worked with a university recently where a lot of their devices were actually off network during the production day. And what that did was, because they did not have any DMZ or any DMZ based boosters, none of them were reachable for devices when they were remote. So all of those devices end up doing a home run to the server. And that's where we really find that the load on the server really impacts, because trying to create and strip down those connections on the fly all the time just hammers the server. So we really want to make sure that booster routing is turned on for devices, so they're routing messages through the boosters, that every device, as Josh mentioned those booster custom fields before, that every device has boosters configured correctly. And I will say on that, yes, it's silly that you have to do that to configure it on a endpoint itself to know where it should go. But until we have a smarter solution around that load balancing, that's the way it is today. That's not an optimal solution, but that's the way it is now. So you want to make sure that they have a home that they can always reach, whether they're on the network or off the network, and that you have booster routing turned on. And if you have more than one booster, that you have some kind of hierarchy of assignment of that with devices, and hopefully load balanced in some way. So half of your devices are to booster 1 first and booster 2 second, and the other half are to booster 2 first and booster 1 second. Those types of best practices. But in almost every environment, the answer differs. So it's been very hard for us to kind of build a wizard to, answer a few questions and then give you a good answer.
And that's why that booster best practices in Discord, that's why I'm doing that, to kind of try and talk through all the possible things that we can think of in that session, and then try and make a general video that we can then have on YouTube. But like Jesse asked about if booster preference could be configured based on smart groups. So I'll use an example of a customer that Tony and I were helping recently, where they have a couple of smart groups that divide up their devices into basically four or so different smart groups based on, I think, the last character of the device name. And then in each of those smart groups, they have a super pref set. And depending on which group you hit, you end up getting the right super pref that puts the boosters in a different order. In their case, they have 4 boosters that take all the connections. And so basically the 4 groups translate to getting one of the 4 boosters as their primary, and the rest is as fallback. And one of the things is, if you have CentOS or Linux-based boosters, by default, the number of maximum connections is set to, I believe, 500 in the UI, but they can really take 2,000 connections. And there's another customer I've been working with lately where on Mac OS boosters, even though our UI prevents you from going over, I think, 400 connections on a Mac OS booster, I'm running them at 2,000 connections right now to see, and I'm validating. I have to reach out to development to see where that lower number came from for Mac OS boosters. Because obviously, if we could support more connections on Mac OS and Windows boosters, that would be great. But I don't want to introduce a setting that would break people. So super prefs would be the way to assign by smart group. And and Tony just answered in chat about IPs was another question, right? So for computers, I've seen some people make custom fields that reveal the actual like IP address that the device has, because depending on where your server is, you might see like the firewall's IP, but they'll make a custom field. When you think about IP, like Tony was mentioning for IPs, if your internal addresses are like 192.168.0.1, right? That IP address exists at Wendy's or McDonald's or, Target or some other place. Any network really could have internal addresses. So you want to think of, if you were to ever use smart groups in relation to what network something's on, you have to think through seeing, other things like, can it look up an internal DNS name that wouldn't be lookupable otherwise? But also you have to think about when those fields evaluate, because they evaluate when inventory happens. So it gets a little bit tricky. So that's why Tony mentioned about making a static group from it and then assigning it. Then it wouldn't be as smart, but it would not come with the same challenges that come with trying to figure out what network something's on. You're better off trying to divide your things by like departments or names, if you can have a way that it kind of works out that it's a balanced number. And in boosters, you can set up a primary, a secondary, a tertiary. So you can always set it up so that devices are hitting multiple boosters. So even if one is full, they'll fail to the next one. And we'll talk about that in that booster thing, the booster session on Discord, and it'll be in that video. So I think that'll be really helpful for folks. These KB articles in the knowledge base are good to look through if you've never looked through them before.
Josh, I'm not sure that happened, but I just wanted to check. Did you just use the word unlookupable?
Tertiary.
No,
Yeah, and tertiary.
Unlookupable was the word that you used there. And I know what tertiary means, but unlookupable, I've not heard that one before.
Can I interject here on the
Yeah.
Is that okay? Because there's a fundamental flaw with the whole process of using a superpref, because you've got to wait for the device to check in before you can get that superpref. And if it's all you've got a booster configured for a different location, you've got to wait for that to fail before it'll then get the superpref, right? And so this is where this kind of whole idea of trying to manage it in this way kind of falls down. I've posted a link to a KB, which is an idea of how to try and automate your booster configuration so that it is configured based on something that is unique to your environment. We can't come up with an example that's going to cover everybody's environment. It's just not possible, because we have no idea of knowing how you set your networks up. And as Josh said, if you try and do it based on IP, you could be in a cafe that's got the same thing as if you're at home or whatever, right? Could you do it based on domain, for example? And so there's examples in that KB of kind of how to look at that. But what you're doing is you're having to really put a process that's local on the device, so the device can establish where it is, and then pre-configure the boosters based on that, and then it will check in to FileWave, right? But if you try and do it with superprefs, it doesn't matter whether it's static group, smart group, whatever, it's got to have that failure first if it's got an incorrect booster configured for where it happens to be now at that point in time when it tries to check in.
Yeah, and this article's here in the booster section, so that's a good thing to talk about. And I was thinking, I had shown this for a second. I wanted to mention someone had a good idea, because we had so many additions and subtractions from the TCP article. Whoops, I didn't mean to select that. But I made some color changes here so that you can tell what is leaving versus or has left versus what's getting added, because it was getting a little crazy. And ultimately, the things that are marked as removed will ultimately get removed from this list, but we keep them here for a little bit so that people realize that they're leaving. So, you should be able to at least tell, what's going away versus what's new. And if it says localhost, that means on the server itself, it goes to that port, but remotely, you don't have to worry about it going to that port. So here's that new one, 2124, that is an incoming port. So I just wanted to mention that, because it was getting a little out of hand with changes to ports. But that's because we're trying to update everything and the whole switch from 0MQ to NATS. Okay. Let's see. So I think I didn't spend as much time on the Alliance forums. They really are a regular, forum that if you check it out, it works like any other. It's running on Envision board, which is a standard popular forum software. And so check it out. And if you have any trouble, actually, I should say this about both. So this Alliance support, this is where you could ask a question about these forums. Like it'll open up a ticket with like me and Jonathan Kane so that we could help you. If you're like, how I can't figure out how to do this particular thing, we'll help you out. And in Discord, you will see that there is a tickets, and you can pick to open a ticket, which will go to me and Jonathan Kane at the moment, and we'll help you out with whatever's confusing or not working. So, but they're not FileWave product tickets, they're about these platforms, because we figure within the platform there's probably some need for support related to that, because our regular support, like Derek's team, wouldn't necessarily support this, because professional services and customer experience really take care of the forums and the Discord. Okay. Any other questions we missed? Oh, there was a question about how did we determine that server performance was impacted, right? I would say that it was a bit of a discovery process through seeing problems crop up. We have a group of customers that we work with, and with FileWave Assist that's actually growing. So we get some intelligence from the folks that we work the most with, and we started seeing things like, that notifications weren't happening, even though the ports are open for notifications. And so when the server was super busy, we were realizing that there was a problem, but we didn't know what. And we did some investigation, like I have a script that I made that I can run on a FileWave server that tells me how many connections are on each network port. So we were noticing things like there were 2,000 devices that were actively connected to a FileWave server where there were boosters in place, and it didn't really make sense. And so we started to just have conversations to pick apart what we were seeing. But it was most obvious if you use NetStat and you look at the number of connections per port, and you see things like there's a lot of these connections on this port, and also the CPU of the server is now at 90% to 100% all the time. For hosted servers, we can see server performance really easily because it's all in AWS and Oracle. So it was mostly a discovery process, seeing things like high CPU, seeing ports that were in use that were not expected. And actually there was some behavior that is by design, like here's something that is just a fact of how it was. It was with 0MQ, and it's this way with NATS. If you go to a booster, you will connect to that booster with 0MQ or with NATS. The booster goes away because it fails or gets full, and your client will fail to the FileWave server, assuming that there's no other booster. It will connect to the FileWave server for 0MQ or NATS. And actually, if you had a second booster, it will still fail to the server for NATS rather than going to a booster 2. And 0MQ actually too. For both cases, it'll fail to the server for 0MQ or NATS, even if there's another booster. And we looked, and NATS in particular uses very little CPU. It's not so much a problem. I just looked at it in this problem and said, hey, there's 2,000 connections to NATS on this particular server. Like, it feels like we should probably be handling that, sending the connection to another booster, right? Keeping it, leveraging the boosters, because otherwise, why would you have boosters? So, like, we've been looking at, making that change, but it was that way under 0MQ too. So, that's not the reason for the busyness. So it's some of that. And there was some work done in the past to put more telemetry in FileWave servers. That's not active really on servers right now, but we have a lot of the work to gather more intelligence about how the servers are doing. And we have some work internally to look at those hosted servers and the Oracle Cloud ones, to watch how they're doing. Because if we can see how they're doing, then we can proactively know that there's a problem before someone even sees it. Hope that explained it. And the renaming issues. So what Jerry wrote about the renaming issues, that is true. So like when we would see this performance thing, at first it was very difficult because different things you would see different things. You'd see notifications wouldn't happen. So like you create a smart group in your admin and you don't see it actually appear. You assign something and you don't see the association appear. But if you quit your admin and restart it, it does. Even though NATS was reachable and functioning, the server was so busy that those notifications weren't happening. Or when you go to rename a device, it's supposed to then queue up, like if it's, let's say, an iPad, it's supposed to queue up a push notification to do that. And we were just seeing things like that. And through this work, we've actually been trying to actively find other problems that may just not have been seen before. We have a thing called the scheduler that handles a lot of tasks. And, through looking at some of these things, we've discovered other things that can be improved in future versions. So there's been a lot of work to improve performance and look at what could be improved in the next versions. So unless there's other things, well, if there were no other things, and if we missed anything, then, you can always, for instance, you can actually send me messages both on the forums and on Discord, whichever one you're on, or you can email professional.services@filewave.com. If it's about PS stuff or really any of the, the forum things that we have here, let me share this so that you have these barcodes if anyone needs them. But you can reach out to me, or customer experience is customer.experience@filewave.com. If it's about like licenses or contacts, updated contacts, customer experience, between customer experience and professional services, we should be able to help you with most things that are not like you're having an issue and it's broken and you need support. And then, it's help.filewave.com, or you can email help@filewave.com. So we try to make it pretty easy, and there's basically sort of 3 paths that you'd want to go. But if you don't remember who to go to any of us and we'll put you in the right place. Okay. So then, I don't know, Tobias, did you want to say anything?
No, I think I just want to thank everyone for being here. I actually, looked through the registrations and we have over 20 countries represented, which again, I think is a very nice compliment to the very global, small but global community that we're building here. I really encourage you to get in touch with us, through the different channels that we presented you again today. And looking forward to have you again, latest in 3 months from now. Is there anything else to add from Tony?
Just thank you very much, everybody, for joining. As always, we really enjoyed doing these, and we look forward to doing the next one too. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.